So I want to welcome you. There's a really good attendance. We had a really good sign up, and I want to say that tells me this topic of trauma-informed classroom instruction is truly important to those of us who teach anywhere in the system and who have experienced over the past 2 years the many disruptions and dislocations from multiple crises and disasters. It's not just us, it's across the entire United States. And so that's why there's a lot of literature and practice developing around the pedagogy of trauma-informed teaching. But it's heartening to see how important it is to our faculty. So I thank you for being here. I want to introduce myself and my colleagues as well. I'm Beth Blankenship. I direct the Center for Teaching Innovation at the University of New Orleans. I'm also the content expert for the UL system currently in online teaching and learning. And I'm joined by my assistant director, Meredith King, also at the CTI at UNO, and our friend and colleague, hello Meredith, and our friend and colleague from Nicholls, Dr. Aimee Hollander, assistant professor in teacher education and director of the Center for Teaching Excellence there. And she created the initial presentation and we have adapted that. So it's gone through several iterations and we're really grateful to her for joining us. Thank you. Hi. We want to thank also the UL system for hosting this, in particular, Katie Dawson, assistant VP for academic innovation and learning, and Ann McKisson, who's making everything run smoothly behind the scenes, coordinator of special projects for the UL system. We really enjoy working with them both. I want to mention that this is one of the first events around this issue of mental health and trauma that the system is sponsoring, but they did have planned an entire mental health conference, particularly for faculty, but Ida disrupted it. That was put together by the UL system mental health content expert, Dr. Terry Dilks from McNeese, who you can imagine had plenty of experience over the past year and a half in trauma. And that will be reconstituted in some form. They're still working that out because it was quite a lot to reschedule, but there will be announcements for that coming out, so please keep an eye out. So our plan today is to get a sense of what we're all experiencing in terms of our own teaching and our students and our situation alongside them. And we'll begin with a little bit of an introduction around what this is. And first, we're going to start with a check-in and a little grounding. Then we'll move on to principles and examples and practices. And then we'll end with some resources to which we're going to invite you to contribute as well. And you may continue to do that after the webinar, which should go on till about 3. So we're going to start with a quick breathing exercise. You might could do this in your classroom, especially if you're having students coming in and out, they're just returning from IDA, or maybe you have students electing to be in the classroom sometimes and online. Others, it's a good idea to maybe take a minute at the beginning of a gathering and ask everyone to focus on where they are and to release some of the distractions that might be getting in the way. So we're going to do it's called box breathing. It's 4 steps. We're going to go through that cycle twice. Each step goes for 4 counts. And the way it works is you exhale over 4 counts and just hold that empty lung space for another 4 counts. Then inhale again over 4 counts and hold that for another 4. I'll count it off and we'll do it twice. If you want to join, do, and if not, you're still going to be breathing, so you're part of it. All right, so go ahead and breathe in so you're ready, and then I'm going to begin. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4. So I think that puts us in a good position to start thinking about why we're here and where we're coming from. So we're in New Orleans, so we're going to ask you where you're at. And you can use Menti, just a few words. We're going to make a word cloud, so we'll know, we'll get a sense of proportion and what's going on with you. Just type on screen 2 or 3 words. We'll go maybe a minute on this. If this doesn't work, pop that into chat. I'm sorry, into the chat box. Okay, we're seeing a clear pattern emerge. Let's keep going for about another 30 seconds.
I don't know who wrote monkey brain, but I think I have that too, whatever that might mean.
Type it. That'll give it, that'll bump it up the word cloud. Oh, hey, Grambling. Good to see Grambling check in. I think Monroe, Lafayette, well, we're all here, I think. The Menti code is 84772520. We'll give you a few more seconds because I know you're just accessing that. I want Cherie to have a chance to contribute. So we have places and we have states of mind. Hey, I'm in Thibodeau. Hello. Well, monkey brain's pretty excellent. Overwhelmed, tired, stressed, exhausted. Curious is great. It's good to see, even in our other overscheduled, multitasking, anxious states, curiosity prevails, and that's a shared attribute, I think, of being in academia. That one's hard to pound out of us. Curiosity, interest, fall. Yeah, okay. I'm holding unreasonably to fall as a point of hopefulness. Like, I can go out and do things that will help with some of the overwhelmed, exhausted, tired, and stressedness. All right, I think we're going to wrap up on this. So we get a sense of where we're at, and I saw gratefulness there, and I'm really grateful that despite some of those predominating feelings, that you're here and thinking about your students. I'm hoping you're thinking about yourself as well, because you are certainly experiencing many of the same things they are, and have the added responsibility of keeping them on track and guiding them and being their light towards achieving their goals, which they're still here trying to do, even as they're worried about their homes and other challenges. So what we're talking about today with trauma, being trauma informed, is we're talking about not just a series of events or a single event, but our response, and it's a physical, material response to events, series of events. What we're experiencing this year might trigger past experiences. A lot of us will remember living through Katrina. People in Lake Charles are probably thinking about their last year, and all that stuff becomes real right over again as a new set of storms or whatever barrels through. So that's the lasting effects. So you may not know you may not be able to extrapolate what's going on with all of your students based on your own response because you don't know what else they've brought with them and your colleagues. So it's unique. Your own might provide a gateway for empathy, right? But you need to leave room open for your students to share with you, or at least to just give them room to deal. Meredith, if you don't mind going forward. So how does that translate into instruction? We're going to move into the principles and practices, but here's a few bullet points, we'll say. You're going to think ahead, give students room to plan ahead by providing them information ahead of time. So things aren't just, so they have a chance not to just be reactive. Give them an idea of what they might encounter. There's debate about what trigger warnings are and what they mean, but when people have an idea of what is going to be covered in the course and the content, what they might encounter, then they can plan ahead on how they're going to respond. They may can deal with the reaction to it outside of the classroom and then be more grounded inside. Keeping room for discussion where everyone feels they can contribute. Keep being checked in and aware of what's going on with your students, knowing that, letting them know that they can share that with you. And certainly there's a whole list here. I'm not going to read every item, but it's, if you'll notice, a lot of these echo what we know from universal design, right? Multiple ways to achieve community, framework of communication, being flexible and asking for input. The same kinds of things that universal design allows for varying degrees of ability, that reflects our awareness that all of our students who are right now experiencing kind of trauma situations need that kind of flexibility and multiple options. So if you've done any UDL training, this is going to be familiar to you. Meredith. Okay, I'm going to hand this over to Aimee Hollander and take it away.
All right, so we are going to be discussing in more details the principles and examples discussed today, and we're actually going to start with predictability and transparency and go in a counterclockwise manner. So we're going to start with predictability and transparency, and then we're going to go into detail with connection and community, flexibility and multiple alternatives, belonging and inclusion, and then end on empowerment and co-creation in the classroom. So when your students are having a trauma response in your class, predictability and transparency, that creates a sense of safety for your students. And I think a lot of times we do this in our everyday lives where every morning you get up and you have a routine and it feels familiar and it feels good. And your students need the same, particularly if they are having a trauma response or have endured a traumatic experience recently. So for example, you can use a routine or consistent structure on how classes are facilitated. And we see this a lot in K-12 where they start a class with a bell ringer. You usually open up your class maybe with a clicker question or maybe like a fun cartoon or meme before you get started. And if you consistently do that, that creates the sense of safety. Additionally, if you know that you will be having some course content that you think may trigger a trauma response. For example, if you're covering something that involves childhood abuse, sexual assault, a major storm, things like that, you can provide information about that content in advance of class settings, through the course schedule, through the syllabus. I'm a big fan of weekly emails. I send my students an email on Monday morning explaining what we're going to be doing that week, what assignments are coming up, and that way the students can prepare for whatever topics that we're going to be discussing that day. You can also use trigger warnings. You can state what content and interactive elements will be included at the start of the class session. So for example, we explained to you all that we're going to be using Mentimeter today, so students can prepare for the use of whatever interactive classroom discussion we're going to be using. And this can easily be adopted to online courses as well. If, especially these semesters, right, with COVID and these major storm events, if you're introducing a new facilitation, participation, or assignment, we highly recommend that you give very detailed instructions along with your expectations. And when you do that, I highly recommend that you not only give it orally, if it's you recording yourself online or telling it to your class, but also putting it in writing. And I would highly recommend that you create a short video that would be available on your learning management system so students can go back and watch it. And so that way, if they are having a trauma response in your course and they don't hear everything that you said, they can still complete the assignment and they won't be emailing you and going back and forth with you on the expectations or the instructions. We also recommend that you use rubrics to clearly state your expectations, either for the assignment or the participation. And then also giving your students options on how they can take care of themselves if they feel triggered. So giving your students ahead of time the permission to turn off their cameras, take a break, do a breathing exercise, take a step outside, take a walk, whatever it might mean that they need. All right, we can keep on going. The next is connection and community, and this is very important. I teach a course on multiculturalism in the classroom and inclusive pedagogy, and this is something that we focus on a lot. When you build community, that is going to increase your students' capacity for engagement, particularly after trauma. So for example, I'm at Nicholls State. Many of my students, including myself, have been deeply affected by Hurricane Ida. And because we've established a strong classroom community within our course, we can lean on each other a little bit more, and my students seem to be a little bit more engaged than other courses where I have not set up that classroom community as strongly. And the way we do this is we explicitly talk about the importance of the community building. I'm a big we person. We are learning together, which is what Beth had mentioned earlier. We are in this together. I am here to facilitate your learning. And so I think my students really understand that, but also understand that they can lean on each other for support. A big thing we can do, and we did this with Mentimeter, is begin class with asking students how they are doing. How has their week been? Doing a temperature check of the room, kind of checking the mood. This really helps, especially before you want to try for our classroom discussion. If everyone's stressed out and no one's done the reading, then you may need to think about trying a different type of classroom discussion tactic than your original ideas. I do this a lot with the Zoom chat. I just, at the beginning of class, tell me how you're feeling, just like you guys did with what institutions you're coming from. Also, if you approach questions and concerns from the classroom perspective, so if there's an issue with an assignment, maybe we go to the entire class to discuss it. Something I like to do at the beginning of the school year is I provide an important date sheet for my course, and then I give my students 1 week to look over that important date sheet with all the other assignments and important dates they have from their other courses. And then as a course together, we can decide if we want to move a major exam or an assignment up a week or back a week. So giving them that buy-in and that connection that we can make decisions as a group. And then of course, encouraging your students to build connections with each other, which will enable them to form study groups and creating support resources and checking on each other. So if a student misses a class, rather than immediately emailing their instructor, they can lean on each other instead and ask each other what they missed. Another way that you can help your students during a traumatic response is creating flexibility and multiple alternatives. And I think we've been doing a really good job of this, particularly during COVID. When an individual is undergoing a traumatic response, sometimes that response can be very unpredictable. Sometimes it will be physical, and the individual doesn't even know what they're going for, like not going for, but what they're going through. So instructors need to be flexible to meet students' needs in order to resist re-traumatization. So if a student's having an anxiety attack in your classroom, you don't want to make it worse so they never want to step into your class again, or they never want to log on to that learning management system page again. So there's a lot of different ways that we can engage with topics. For example, you can give students the option to choose between different breakout groups that will focus on specific parts of a topic, or different perspectives of a topic. That could include, if you're teaching English, different character perspectives, but giving them a little bit of power of choice can help them during their trauma response. Also providing options for different ways in engaging with material, especially if the topic may be triggering. That student may not want to write a paper about that, and they may want to consider a related topic or a different type of assignment to engage with that topic. You can go to the next one, Meredith. Additionally, and I'm going to say this with the caveat that you still have to protect yourself and your time, but you can provide options for students to either investigate different topics or investigate the same topic in different ways. But when you do this, do protect yourself in that you don't want to grade 5 essays, 5 presentations, 5 TikToks. Like you need to decide, give your students 2 or 3 options that you can handle grading a couple of each in your course, particularly for our instructors who have very large courses. Sometimes it's just because of time, giving a multiple choice exam is the assessment of choice. So if you can provide some flexibility and alternatives in your assessments, I would recommend that. A lot of us right now have adopted, since COVID, doing multiple small stakes assessments and small formative assessments throughout the semester instead of major exams. And if you're going to do that, you could consider offering a certain amount of quizzes or assignments that could be dropped. So if you are going to have your students writing 1 or 2 discussion boards a week, or taking a weekly quiz, and there's 15 quizzes in the semester, you could count 13, if I said 15, 13 or 12 of those quizzes. And that way, if your student is having a bad week, they won't be penalized for having a bad week with that quiz, because you'd be counting the top ones. And then, of course, encouraging your students to contact you. I think something we think is that students are automatically going to email you if they are experiencing a traumatic event or having a trauma response in your class, and that is not necessarily the case. Just by reaching out to my students after Ida and finding out what their situations were, I was kind of shocked about some of their situations, and also surprised that they didn't reach out to me sooner. But I think too, when we're all undergoing trauma or the same traumatic event, some folks think that they don't need to share that situation, and they don't necessarily need to, but it does help the instructor for meeting the student where they're at and meeting their needs. All right, next slide. Additionally, creating a classroom space where students feel like they belong, intentionally cultivating a classroom where students feel included, that's going to lower your students' perception of danger and increase their capacity to engage and learn. Your students are already undergoing this heightened traumatic response in your class, and we want to make sure we create a safe and even brave space for them to still feel like they can be themselves. So using your students' names properly, their pronouns properly, allowing your students to rename themselves on Zoom, those can all create safer spaces for your students. And then also explicitly acknowledging your intention. I always tell my students that I want them to feel like they belong in this class, that they can bring their whole self into this classroom, and that if at any point they cannot do that, to let me know so that we can change our classroom procedures or assignments or whatever it is that we need to do. Also, we cannot assume that students in our class have been affected by the topics the same way. I think something that Beth brought up is trauma affects us all very differently. And even, like, for example, Hurricane Ida, my Nicholls State students have all experienced it in very different ways. And I cannot make an assumption that we are all experiencing these things the same way. Same with COVID, with issues with employment, familial matters. And if generalizations are made in your classroom, or if you make a mistake that makes folks feel excluded in your classroom, acknowledge them. It's okay. We're human. we make mistakes despite being the instructor of the course, I think it humanizes you and your students will find you much more relatable. I think I got one more. Yeah. And finally, we're going to talk about the empowerment and co-creation. When you're experiencing trauma, you often lose the ability to make decisions to protect yourself. And I think sometimes, especially as college instructors, we love giving our students the power of choice. Pick any topic to write about, pick any scientist that you're going to do a biography on, create a lit review on any research topic you want. But sometimes, if someone's experiencing a trauma response, those decisions become almost paralyzing. For example, I'm giving this Zoom talk from my sister-in-law's bathroom in her house in Connecticut right now because my home is not livable. And that's my reality right now. And when I was packing up my kids to head to Connecticut, I literally was going through trash bags of clothing that I had pulled out of my home. And I could not figure out what to put in the suitcases. I've been packing my kids for a long time. I can make these decisions, but I think in that traumatic response, I was just paralyzed with that and needed somebody to just guide me through it and talk it out. Now, you cannot make decisions for someone who is enduring a trauma response, but what you can do is you can value them and you can encourage them to help them make those decisions and choices. So for example, in the classroom, and I'll give you an example of how I managed to pack my kids up, you explicitly state the value of your students' knowledge, insights, and expertise within the course. In my case, my friend Danny, who had taken my family in temporarily up in Baton Rouge, she literally was like, Hollander, you can do this. You've done it before. We can get through this. Let's think about this. How many pairs of underwear are your kids going to need before you have to do laundry? Right? These are very simple things and decisions to make. And what I just needed was somebody to encourage and remind me that I can do this and it's going to be fine. I think encouraging your students to notice what they need in order to take care of themselves. I think we get a lot of students who are like, I'm so stressed out. I don't even know what to do first. And just sitting down and saying, let's make a list of everything you need to get done this week and then prioritize those things. There's such simple little things that we can do to encourage our students and empower them to help them be successful. Also, asking your students about their knowledge of a topic before introducing it. I love doing this. Particularly, I teach science education, and I like to do this so I understand the misconceptions that my students are going to be bringing in to their into the class so that I know what I might need to combat as well. And then also providing frequent opportunities for student feedback about how the class is going and student experiences. We are close to midterms, and this is a great opportunity for you to put in your learning management system an anonymous survey and just say, hey, what do you think of these assignments? How do you think the class is going? How do you think I can improve this class? If you were to, would you recommend this class to another student? And understanding that feedback and then addressing it to the entire class and saying, hey, I received your feedback. Thank you so much. I understand I do assign a lot of readings. Maybe you can't change anything about that. And you have to say, unfortunately, we have to do these readings for us to have these classroom discussions and to complete these assignments. But in other ways, maybe you can decrease the number of discussion boards or quizzes in the class just to meet your students and make them feel empowered. All right, did we move on to the next slide? Wait, did I finish? I think I finished. Okay, Meredith, it is all yours. Take it away.
Hey everyone. So I'm just going to take you through some of the practices really quickly that we've talked about. I'm going to give you a few sort of grounding practices because I know lots of times people are like, what do I do in those moments if something comes up? We did one at the beginning to get everyone sort of in the same space that can speak to community, but also if something comes up, if the class is turning a certain way, if you think you need a moment, you can do some of these things to bring your class back together, to refocus in the transition moments between maybe lecture and group work or lecture and discussion or whatever it is. You can sort of give them some grounding space to refocus and bring everyone together. So first, we're going to talk about some ones that have to do with breathing. These can be really good because everyone can breathe, right? Some of these later ones that I get to will involve like movement or things like that, which can be a little difficult for some people depending on their bodies. But breathing is good because all of us do it. So we can do a box breath. Beth took us through one of those earlier, right? You can think about a box in your mind and focus on something, do a little mindfulness with that as you inhale for 4, exhale for 4. You can do a box breath like Beth led us through. You can, this says trace the outline of a finger. Obviously, if there are people in your class who can't do that, they can imagine tracing the outline of a finger. And the idea is as you go up, you inhale and exhale while you're moving down, and you sort of trace it that way. But again, you can also imagine doing it, right? I'm closing my eyes and imagining it. And then you can breathe in and out of your belly. If I have any other theater people, I'm a former theater kid. I like to do diaphragmatic breathing a lot, which is essentially what you're talking about. But if you tell people diaphragmatic breathing, lots of times they don't follow you at all. So you can say breathe in and out of your belly. And again, if people are capable of doing so, they can put their hands on right on their stomachs and breathe in and try to move their hands. If they can't use their hands in that manner or don't feel comfortable doing so, obviously they don't have to, but it can be really cool, especially if you give people some space or let them lie down if they want to. You can even do things like put a piece of paper on your stomach if someone is willing to lie down to watch it move up and down. It can be really cool to do that, as well as getting really good oxygen to your body. It oxygenates you, fills up your lungs in a different way if you're breathing into your diaphragm. So those are just some quick breathing practices that we can all do. And then here's some vocal practices. Again, maybe not everyone in your class can be vocal or feels comfortable being vocal. So it's a matter of, like we have been saying, giving some choice, doing a variety of things, but here are some ones that you can do. You can hum in a low tone. You can buzz like a bee, experimenting with different tones. Sometimes the ones that sound silly get people out of their head, right? So rather than just saying like hum, you can say buzz like a bee. And that, as much as students will be like, oh, that is so cheesy, they also will know what it means and do it, and it gets them out of their head a little bit and loosens them up. And then you can sing or hum a song. Again, if you have somebody who doesn't want to do that, they can not do that. If you have somebody in your class who loves singing, you can ask them, and they don't mind being put on the spot, you can ask them to sort of lead you in something, right? So you can also use this to empower students, to create community. All of those sorts of things are things that you can do along with these grounding practices. And then I have some imagination and movement ones that I've put together. Please note, again, the movement ones can be difficult for many people in certain situations. So I like to put these two together because it gives you sort of a good alternative. Maybe say you can either do like a mind or body grounding exercise here. So if you're doing a mind one, do this. And if you want to do a body one, do this. So I like to put these together so that we can think about it that way. So you can think about a time when you felt loved and happy, and then just think about notice what happens to your body, right? It gets them to focus on the physical sensation. It also can get them, if they're going through something really difficult right now, can get them to try to put their mind someplace else. You can recall a place in nature that you like to be, and then try to think about all of your senses in that place. I guess you could do one that isn't nature. People always think nature is really calming, but I'm also like a city kid. So sometimes thinking of a place that I like to be in the city can also be very useful for me. But again, that sort of goes to that loved and happy idea. And then the body ones, just moving around your space. Again, this can be really good in transitions in the classroom where you're like, okay, we're going to do group work, but for 10 seconds before we do group work, if you feel like doing a body exercise today, just get up and move around, stretch your legs, stand up. You can do one in place where you can tense and release a part of your body, right? You just tense it and release it. It can be something as small as a toe or as big as like your back. You just tense it and release it. And again, notice what happens in your body in those sensations. And you can just, again, basic things that we all do sort of when we're at our desk for a really long time. I've been sitting here for a while, just stretching your arms and then your legs and doing it in sort of a sequence in a purposeful manner. There's a lot that overlaps with mindfulness here, so that you're noticing what you're doing and paying attention, and just get you, again, sort of out of your head into the moment. The reason that we call these grounding practices lots of times is because literally, right, we're trying to bring you to, I always feel like it sounds so cheesy, but it's true. Bring you to the moment, bring you to the earth, make you feel connected to what's going on. Because sometimes if you are going through a trauma response, you are very far away. You can dissociate, and we want to bring you back to the moment and help you come back in. So those are basic practices that you can use. You can also tell your students a few of them. You can have students lead them. You can have students pick, like, okay, X student pick a mind exercise and you pick a body exercise, and let us know which ones you want to do today. And that way, again, you are fostering community and bringing them all in that way. So let's talk about some things to do in the moment, right? So we're talking about grounding exercises as a thing to do. So continuing practices. Most of these seem really obvious, but it's just stuff to like keep in mind and check off in your mind. It's probably stuff that most of us do anyway, but you want to be as calm as possible, right? If someone is frantic, you don't want to add into their frantic energy. And also if someone is dissociated or miserable in a moment, right? You want to be calm. You want to be non-judgmental when you listen. You want to create that space for them. You want to empathize with the person rather than saying how something sounds foreign or you couldn't understand. You want to acknowledge how they're feeling in that moment. That must be very scary for you. Those type of things, right? Show them that you follow, allow them plenty of time and space. So if someone says, you know, I need to leave the classroom and has that look, let them go, right? Allow them the time and space, check in with them later. You can offer reflective comments, give them different options, right? So even with the grounding things that I was saying, I kept saying, give different options, and that's someone when someone's not necessarily like at the height of a triggered moment, that can be just when we are all dealing with trauma consistently, right? So offering that choice, but again, making those specific choices. So rather than saying, do a grounding exercise, you can say, here is a list of mind, here is a list of body, we're going to do one of these. Because like Aimee was saying, you don't want to be paralyzed when choices are really, really overwhelming. You want to let people know that you're there, that you're a supportive person. And again, a lot of this reflects some of the stuff that we've already said. And then a big one, making sure that you get consent before providing resources can be really, really huge. I know that all of us want to help. We all want to be there for our students, for our colleagues as much as possible, but sometimes people have all the resources that they need or not in a space to get those resources right now, or wouldn't feel comfortable with you being the one giving them resources. So you want to make sure that you check in and ask them what's going on with them, and if they need resources, if they would feel comfortable with that, before you go ahead and just pour information over them, because they might not be in a place where they could even hear it right then. So then there's just got some sample language, again, the sort of reflective, calm, non-judgmental statements. Thank you for sharing with me. That must be frustrating. It makes sense for you to have that reaction. That one can be very empowering. And then also little things if we were online, like, would you like to turn off your videos? Would you like to mute yourself? And again, maybe giving them that option up front, letting them know if you need a minute, you can always turn off your video without having to explain to me why. I will not ask you to keep it on. I will understand if you need to mute yourself. I want everyone to be in this community and be present, but if you need to do this, that's understandable. And then some don'ts. Again, these are just basically the opposites of the do's for a lot of them. And again, stuff that hopefully seems pretty obvious to us, but it's important to go over. You don't want to make decisions that remove their control. That can be little things like, will you have to keep your camera on? Or it can be bigger things like or other things that seem little, like, you know, again, handing them resources when they are not in that space, you're removing their control to do that. Or that can be bigger things, forcing them to stay in a time or space where they just cannot be anymore. You don't want to rush. Definitely don't want to use shame or threats. I can't imagine that any of us would, but that frustration that can come up, and let's be real, it happens if a student has been consistently I don't know, not communicating and not available and not present. And you get eventually sometimes to that place where you're like, if you don't do this, you will fail. This will happen. It will be bad. And rather than trying that approach, especially when we are all going through something, asking them what's up, gently reminding them of what consequences could be, not necessarily threats. You don't want to patronize them. You definitely don't want to touch someone. Again, in the same way that I think all of us have that urge to give resources, lots of us have that urge to give comfort. And if someone is going through something and you want to reach out and give them a hug, because maybe you're a hug person, I'm definitely a hug person, and I always want to reach out and give people hugs. So that's a big one that I have to remember, is sometimes people don't want that. Their trauma could have to do with physical touch, so that could be re-traumatizing them, which is obviously a thing we don't want to do. So holding back, and again, asking consent. May I give you a hug? Would you like a hug? Is me holding your shoulder something that you would like? Things like that, asking consent before you would do that. So don't touch people. Don't act alarmed, even if they tell you something really horrible. That calm level, right? Don't be horrified, don't be embarrassed. That calmness, that understanding. If someone is disclosing something to you, they're doing something extremely personal and they're trusting you with that. So they want to feel like they are trusted in response. And part of that also is, don't be sarcastic about it. Again, I can't imagine that any of you would, but just to clarify, to make sure. And then afterwards, right? So something has happened, we've gone through a class, we've talked about something really traumatic, or someone had a trauma response, or it's just been a lot and you feel like, okay, the semester's over now. And maybe that's what the afterwards is. Whenever afterwards is, make sure that you're doing whatever you need to do, right? So you've been doing what you need for your class and making sure your students are getting through it, but you want to make sure that you settle yourself and think about what's going on for you and take care of yourself. We are all people first. Our students are people first. I tell my students all the time, I know that you are people first. You have to be humans before you can be students. And I have to be a good human who is good to myself before I can be a good instructor. So taking that time after you bring someone through it and are calm and reflective and ask them if they want resources and get through whatever it is, and whether that again is the full semester or a small amount, you want to check in with yourself, see if any of these practices apply to you, and see what you need and what you can do for yourself. So as we're coming towards the end of this, we want to ask y'all, what practices have worked for you and which ones would you want to try? And again, you can go to menti.com and use the code 84772520, and you can just go ahead and type these right in. And as you type them in, they should start popping up on the screen here. So go ahead and interact. If there are practices that you would want to try, ones that we've talked about, ones that you've heard about, ones that have worked for you, we want your input. So you can go ahead and do that. That should be open now. And if you can't get that to work, you can always put that in the chat. Active listening, yep, that's an absolute good one. It's a thing I work on a lot. I'm a talker. I gotta be a better listener. I work on that one a lot. Directly asking, what do you need from me? That can be really good. Sometimes people don't know what they need, so that can be overwhelming sometimes. So again, if you are saying something like, what do you need from me? You can give them a few things that they might need. Like, what do you need from me? I can offer these things. So following up on that. Breathing exercises. I know people just keep bringing that up, and it's just a huge one, right? Like, we love our breathing techniques. It absolutely helps.
Can I jump in real quick? I
Of
love
course.
doing breathing exercises before a major assessment, like collectively as a class if you're meeting in person. But also there's a ton of box breathing YouTube videos that you can post for your students if you're teaching online, and have them watch one and breathe with it before they jump into whatever assessment you're doing. And for the person who wrote about bell ringers, I love using bell ringers as a formative assessment to see where my students are at before we get started that day. So if that's something you want to adopt, it's a lot of fun.
I see someone saying jokes to relieve tension. I love jokes to relieve tension. I am a sarcastic, funny person. I use jokes all the time. You want to be careful with that, though, because you want to make sure that whatever joke you're making, you're not alienating someone. It's not at the expense of someone. And sometimes we think we're making jokes that are perfectly harmless, and they can be triggering. So just make sure that you're careful with that. But I use that all the time. I am a joke person. 100%. Someone in the chat said dad puns. Dad puns are usually a safe bet.
Someone wrote timely communication, and I think that is huge. I think that brings us back to creating that predictability in the class. If your students know that you're going to respond within 24 to 48 hours, or they're going to get a weekly email or a weekly announcement, and they know exactly how they get to communicate with their instructors, that definitely makes them feel a lot safer.
I love this, not letting your students have the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think that's absolutely wonderful to remind them of, especially by people who get paralyzed by choice or by that need to do the best that they possibly can, and they can't turn in this assignment because it's not perfect, and that stresses them out and brings out a ton of trauma. I think that it's really good to remind our students that we are trying to get them to try, to learn, to develop. And it's not about turning in the best product. It's about the journey of learning. I tell that to my students a lot. I'm teaching a composition class this semester, and I tell them writing is rewriting literally like every day. That if you're not rewriting, you're not doing it right. And if I give you things to edit or work on, that means you're doing it right. So I absolutely remind people of that. Yeah, talking about your own responses from day one, right? Obviously, you don't want to re-traumatize people or do something like that, but letting them know, again, I'm human, especially when it's a big trauma that we're all going through, right? I'm human. And during Ida, I was a little bit more scattered in my communication than I wanted to be. And when I was staying with my sister-in-law in Shreveport, I was a little bit off my game, and I wound up, I've have some papers that I've been needing to grade, and telling them that, I appreciate their patience with me, just like they appreciate my patience. Those sorts of things can be really, really useful. Having an attitude of compassion. Oh, I love y'all, and y'all are awesome. Affirmations. I love that.
Yep.
Just like affirmations. That's a great one. Telling them that they are capable, that they are worthy, that you are here for them, that they're good. All of that can be stuff that they're not hearing enough. These are all fantastic. And whether it's stuff that y'all have tried or stuff that y'all are going to try, I love every single one of these, and I love y'all, and I appreciate your feedback so much in this, and I appreciate y'all participating. So just to close out, we want to send you some resources before we see if there are any questions quickly, I think through the Q&A. So Nicholls, Aimee has put together for their CTE some resources for students and faculty post-IDA, some really great stuff there. Aimee, can you put that link in the chat if you have it quickly, just so that they can click on it? Thank you. So that can be really, really useful, and I'm thankful to Aimee and to Nicholls for giving us all access to that and letting us use that. So that is the end of our presentation. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you for being engaged. I'm
We do have
gonna,
some time and we have the
go ahead
Q&A
and
open. Yeah.
stop our share, and our Q&A is open. And also, Katie put feedback form in the chat. Please give us feedback. Same way that we say open up feedback from your students so that then you can see if there's something that you can adjust. We always want feedback from y'all. I always say when I'm giving presentations that all I'm ever trying to do is model classroom behavior, right? So the same things that I would want my students to do or engage with is like what I want y'all to do, how I want y'all to interact. What I'm doing is what I should be doing in the classroom. I'm always saying that it's sort of the same thing. Oh, that is for real, Matthew. That is for real.
And Matthew, we talk about that in one of my classes, and my students really have a tough time with that. So yes, thank you for mentioning that.
You know, this will be recorded and available later. And, you know, if you want to share your experience today with any of your colleagues, I believe there are more out there who can benefit, who are struggling to do the best they can in their classrooms. And, you know, as many of us are dealing with FEMA and SBA and insurance companies and being not at home, possibly teaching right now from remote and interesting locations.
Amy's feeling real called out right now, Beth.
If you're in the mailroom or if you're on a Zoom and your colleagues are talking about their experiences and how hard it is to keep up or keep their students keeping up with them, remind them that we're talking about this, we're trying to provide support, and that this is a pretty quick presentation. The PowerPoint will be out there. We can share that with people if they need it, and they can, if they have time, review this recording. I think Anne will know more about when that will be, the recording will be posted, and I believe she has some editing to do first. But I think this is the kind of thing that should ripple out. And you know, if you're interested in doing something like this on your campus, talk to us as well. That's what we're here for.
For sure. I like how all of us just vigorously started nodding, like, yes, please get us involved. We love it.
I'm putting my email here, or actually I'll just put the UNO email.
Your students appreciate it too. I mean, I'm checking in with my students all the time, and they tell me about professors who are showing compassion, just like we did during COVID, and they do understand and appreciate that. So
if you want to share your CPE email, so if you want to get in touch with any of us, please, that's why we're here.
And I also just want to remind y'all that, you know, when we're talking about trauma, we tend to be thinking about like right now, right? We're always thinking about like, because we have a pandemic and hurricanes, and Louisiana has gone through some stuff. So we tend to think about the immediacy, but it's important to remember that that compounds with the everyday stuff that your students are going through, right? And so there's stuff going on in their everyday lives that has nothing to do with this, that then they're dealing with all of this on top of it. And that's probably true for y'all as well. So having that extra sense of awareness, not just of sort of the global thing that we're going through, but also of how that affects the personal, can be really important right now. So I just wanted to make sure that we're being aware of all of that for your students and for yourself. Again, check in with yourself, give yourself space to realize that one big trauma can bring up lots of other littler things or big things that are personal. One global trauma can bring up personal traumas. That's what I'm trying to say. So check in with yourself, give yourself space as well. Okay, well, if no one has any other questions, again, you can always still put it in the Q&A. We'll hang out for a few more minutes just to see we're here. We're available to have a little bit more of a chat. if you want it. But besides that, I hope you'll have an amazing rest of your week. And thank you so, so much for being here. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you again to Katie and to Anne for this opportunity. You're doing great things for the system, and we love being a part of it.
Oh, Matthew, yes.
And
Yes.
I think, and here's something though to consider with those professors. Some of us, how we cope with our trauma is by trying to live like it's not happening. And I am trying to understand that with the folks that I work with, because we definitely are seeing that where we are trying to be business as usual, despite everything that is happening in the world today or what is happening with your students. So Matthew, yes. And I don't know what the right answer is for that, because that just might be a way that they're coping with trauma as well.
Yeah, I think that I try to be, again, non-judgmental of that, which can be difficult because that is a judgment that I make. So I try to be as non-judgmental as possible when I'm meeting with someone who is putting up resistance to some of these ideas. But I also then try to find those moments that, again, can connect us and perhaps find some shared space or shared discussion where I can try to find ways to communicate why this is important or what's going on or why we need to focus on this. Again, all of us, I think anyone who becomes an educator in the academy, I love that, we're talking about sort of that curiosity and that engagement of wanting to learn. And I think that even for people who've really dug in their heels and have been doing this, like teaching for a long time and have their ways set, there's still something in them that is curious and wants to learn. And I think if you can find those connections and give that space, that can be a place to start to form that. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it is a small practice. Sometimes it is a little thing, but that's sort of the inroad that I can have.
That's a great question, Will, about mandatory reporting. And we're, I think, probably about as informed as you are on that, but it is legitimate. It is a requirement. And we've seen some pretty top of the fold, okay, I'm old saying that, top of the fold news stories in the past year or so from our flagship university that remind us that it's absolutely not, it's not a judgment call. I mean, it is mandatory reporting. You can tell students ahead of time, think about how you're going to talk to me about whatever you're going to talk to me about, and know that I have to report it. There are probably ways you can share something with me that if you're not reporting a crime, but if you want to talk to someone who isn't a mandatory reporter, there are counselors on campus. And in fact, when things verge into that kind of information, we're not counselors. We can't help a student with a sexual assault, with an emotional response. We can walk them over to the counseling center or help them make an appointment online, show where they can get in touch with that person, and we can tell them what those parameters are when they indicate that they're going in that direction. So we can be empathetic, recognize what they're saying and say, before you go on, know that in my position, I have to report this. We have counselors on campus that can talk to you completely freely without that requirement. And they're good people and I can take you to them, or I can help you get to them. So then you've given the student a choice and you've validated and acknowledged that you're taking what they say or what they're trying to express to you seriously.
Yeah, so Will is saying that he has that kind of language in his syllabus, but worries about students giving up on talking to people. That's it's a hard line. You want to be someone who they can talk to. You want to understand what's going on. I think reminding them that you are always a safe space to talk about ideas, general things, but if there are certain types of specifics where you will be mandated to report, but that if they can find a way to discuss it that is not specific to them, where they're not using specific language to them, where those are things that you don't necessarily have to report. And, you know, it's just sort of and again, being vulnerable and open with them about that too, that it is a hard line for you, that you always want to be able to be there, but you are legally mandated to do a thing. So you understand on either end of it if they want to or don't want to share, and giving them that choice.
And additionally, I think too, we need to protect ourselves. If you know that a student divulging information to you is going to create a trauma response to yourself, then, you know, that's when you may want to direct them as well. Like Beth said, I'm not a trained counselor or mental health specialist, and there might be things that my students want to share with me that may trigger my trauma response. So consider that as well. You want to be as approachable as possible, but there may be hard lines that you need for yourself to protect yourself.
And it creates an opportunity. I mean, there are people who aren't scrupulous and who have used that opportunity of, oh, you're confiding in me about your trauma, and they then are themselves not trustworthy people. I mean, I don't want to go into details, but it's an accountability issue for people who are in a position of loco parentis in some ways to students and student workers in their department or in their classrooms. And if there was not a mandatory reporting requirement, that can end up making students more vulnerable. I understand the kind of, you know, I don't want to be a cop, I don't want to be a police, but I also want to take this young person's safety seriously. And no, there isn't an ideal structure for that, as we see over and over. There are definitely drawbacks and downsides to investigations on campus versus police, or police versus campus investigations. There isn't any perfect way to deal with predatory behavior or trauma, but you know, we do have a structure we have to follow, and there are opportunities within that for students to have that ability to discuss it freely. It may not be with you, but with someone. And I just feel like that's an area that still has a lot of development. Yes. Yeah, I think I want to respect your time. We've gone a little bit over, and I appreciate anyone who's stayed after to ask questions. Feel free to contact us, email that we provided. You can also find us on our university websites. We want to hear from you again. And thank you for attending. I think the traditional Zoom wave goodbye, which I've come to treasure. Thanks.